Well, it's disgusting to even have to respond to that. It's absolutely false.
How did they know anything about anything?
We, the jury, find Patsy Ramsey liable for the wrongful death of JonBenet Ramsey.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. In this week's analysis video, we are following up with episode 2 of the recent Netflix docuseries all about the cold case of JonBenet Ramsey, which is one of the most famous cases in all of US crime history, and for good reason. There are a lot of strange elements to the story that the parents have told. There are a lot of elements that the police department really messed up in the investigation, and when you put those two things together, it's a very confusing case that has everyone very split on what happened to JonBenet Ramsey. In this video, I'll be joined by a very special guest to look at some of the behaviors in the recent interviews, in some old interviews, and some details of the case that were highlighted in episode 2 of the Netflix series. So this is not an analysis of the case overall, it's an analysis of that specific episode. If you missed last week's analysis video of the first episode of the docuseries, it's fine, you can watch it after this analysis. There isn't really an order to things, but there is something really important that was discussed. I was joined by Joe Navarro, who was an FBI agent for 25 years and has a lot of experience with things like this, and we talked about the challenges of analyzing a documentary that's being filmed 28 years after the fact. So there's the fact that documentaries are directed that can affect behaviors. There's the fact that it's been 28 years, and we know from research that memory is quite flawed, and in time there are things that just shift and change and get modified. There's the fact that this is a story that's been told again and again and again over 28 years, and that in and of itself affects the narrative. And finally, there's the very important fact that a lot of the people who are being interviewed for this documentary have a fear of not being believed because there's a very split public opinion. And we know from research that when we fear not being believed, it has an effect on our behaviors and delivery, because we feel that need to oversell something because we know some people may not believe us. So let's keep all that in mind as we go through this analysis. My guest today is a regular on the channel. He served 20 years in the US Navy. He is a best-selling author on the subjects of persuasion and behavioral analysis. He studied neuroscience at both Harvard and Duke universities, and he trains intelligence officers and government agencies in interrogation and behavior profiling. Please welcome back to the channel, by very popular demand, Chase Hughes.
Spidey, thanks for having me on, man. I got your text yesterday. Wanted to jump in here with you because I think this is going to be interesting.
Super excited to do this. Let's go.
It is entirely possible that this murder mystery will never be solved, and that no one will ever be tried for the terrible crime committed against that lovely child. Except for the mock trial we are about to stage for you right here in our studio.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who dressed up this child in a sexually provocative pose with high heels, lipstick, and suggestive dances going on? I mean, this is the baggage they bring to this case. You must do justice here.
How did they know anything about anything?
We, the jury, find Patsy Ramsey liable for the wrongful death of JonBenet Ramsey.
Okay, Chase, so that was a little snippet of the mock trial that was on national television at the time, hosted by Geraldo Rivera. And he has since apologized for that because I think he understood some of the effects that it had on public opinion. But for me, as I watch this, I think of something that you teach in your book and in your seminars, and it's called the FATE model, F-A-T-E. And this is your work on persuasion and how persuasion works. And it's absolutely brilliant. So can you talk to us about the FATE model and how it applies to this mock trial?
We had this lower part of our brains, some people call the mammalian brain, but that's where a lot of our decisions are made. That's where things get influenced in our head that doesn't necessarily involve a lot of language and stuff. And that's the most effective way to influence a person, is this mammalian part, because it takes place on this deep, almost an ancestral level. And FATE stands for focus, authority, tribe, and emotion. The 4 ways that you can influence an animal. If you look at watching a dog training video, it's those 4 things. You influence a human being at a deep level, it's the same 4 things. But let's go through, if we're just looking at this mock trial, how the FATE model would apply it. We have the focus first, F-A-T-E. So it's focus first. So the novelty, the newness of this mock trial draws a ton of focus because it's unusual. It's really dramatic. So people tune in out of curiosity, and their attention remains captivated by this performative nature of the trial itself. Then the next letter is A for authority. So the use of courtroom settings, legal jargon, actors playing out these roles of attorneys and witnesses, but it's also on television. And back in when this was filmed, you had to sit 30 feet away from the TV, had the giant TVs, but anything on TV was a big deal. So we're all wired to take this proceeding very seriously. Even if it's not official, it looks like something that's authoritative. It triggers compliance in the human brain, and nobody's an exception. I am still not an exception. I have a mammalian brain that can be influenced like everybody else. Then we get down to tribe, and there is a mountain of studies that have been done that we are tribal thinkers, we are tribal decision makers, and we are tribally oriented when it comes to seeking goals, our goals in life. So audiences who are watching become part of a collective tribe because they're hearing the reactions of the audience, so they know how to feel. I'm agreeing with groups. We're prone to agree with that. So they're watching it together. They form opinions. They engage in discussions. They're listening to the audience. So the sense of group belonging amplifies the impact of the narrative that's presented here. Then we get down to emotion, the final part of the fate model. So this trial very much engages these emotional scripts by playing on the viewer's sympathy for the victim, outrage over the crime. There's curiosity about the truth. So those emotions just bypass all of our critical thinking, because anytime we get emotions triggered, our critical thinking just kind of takes a backseat. So this little dramatized narrative simplifies all of these really complex issues, and it makes it a lot easier for people like us to just develop an opinion without any deep analysis. Some scientists call that the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is pretty well researched. I think just presenting entertainment as quasi-judicial proceedings, I think it may undermine maybe some of the people's understanding of the process and think that I have this figured out. And we get that sense of I have that figured out so much faster when stuff like this is going on. And mock trials can seriously influence actual jury pools, attorneys, even judges indirectly, just by saturating public opinion like that.
Love it. Absolutely brilliant. A really good summary of a lot of the things that is, like you said, researched out there on the subject of persuasion. These things like authority, tribal thinking, or group thinking. There's tons of research out there. And it's funny because a lot of us think that we might be immune to that. Like, oh no, that wouldn't really work. But these studies like the Milgram study on authority, and then you have studies like the Solomon Asch study that was about how we think to fit in. And it's crazy how tons of studies like this show with extreme high accuracy that these are things that influence the way we actually behave. So yeah, all really, really good points. I do want to make one thing really clear. We're not saying that the verdict of this mock trial was incorrect, that these parents had nothing to do with what transpired that day. What we are suggesting is that when you do it this way, it sways public opinion as opposed to following the evidence and doing this the right way, even if you end up at that same conclusion.
Well said.
On December 23rd, JonBenet is dressed as a little elf doing a show for senior citizens. She picks up a saxophone, and for the next minute and a half, she masturbates with it.
What's the significance of that?
That's a child who's been sexually stimulated. At 6 years of age, you're not going to put a saxophone between your legs and rub it back and forth. And that's right on the tape. And I don't know why anybody didn't pick it up.
I have an idea as to why nobody picked it up, because that's not exactly what happened. The reason I cut this up the way I did is because for those who haven't seen the footage, the way she represented it, the way she talked about it, paints a certain image in your mind. But if we look at what it actually was, I think most people will find that there's a bit of a difference. So this is what it actually was. And Chase, I don't know if it's the same for you, but to me, that more or less looks like the way a child would play with a saxophone if they were pretending to play the saxophone. There are things that she's saying that are literally incorrect. Like, for example, she's saying between her legs. Well, it's not between her legs. And by the way, I know that there are people out there who find pageantry with children a little bizarre, and I can totally understand that. But this, to me, just appears like a girl playing a saxophone, pretending to play the saxophone. And I think the way it was described misrepresents what this was. But Chase, what do you think?
Yeah, she held the saxophone further away from herself than Kenny G does. And you texted me this video this morning. And as I was watching it, I had not seen the saxophone video yet. And I'm like, oh my God, I missed something that's bizarre and weird. The way that it was described, I'm like, I can't believe I've never seen this. The way that that was described, I was horrified. And I almost didn't want to continue watching to see the clip of it. And then it's just like a normal kid doing normal stuff, playing a saxophone in front of people, the same way a kid would in front of their grandparents. And it's by far one of the most willfully ignorant things I've heard somebody say in a long time. And I think what we're seeing here is a mix of delusion, cognitive bias, which is confirmation bias in her, and probably attention-seeking behavior just layered on top of that.
Yeah, especially the way she almost provokes the audience by saying, I don't know why anybody didn't catch that. Like, I'm the only one who caught that. Yeah, you're the only one who caught that for a reason.
Yeah, the only one who saw it. One more thing at the very end of this is we see a classic tongue judge. And this is where the tongue comes out of the lips like this. Most commonly, you'll see this in, I think, just about every body language book you can buy. Even the first body language book ever written, called Body Language, by a guy named Julius Fast. You're going to see that in there. And a tongue jut, you'll see that mostly when people feel like they're getting away with something. And that's just weird to see after this. And it just, maybe there's some, I'm getting away, not with the deception, but I'm getting away with the media deception or the media attention that I was seeking in the first place.
Yeah, it's like a universal signal of a close call. And sometimes you see it, and it's different from a lip lick. It doesn't have this kind of grooming, it's just this quick jut, and sometimes the teeth are involved where you see that teeth hold it back. Now, some people might look at this and go, okay, it's not that big a deal because most people just watch this lady and go, what is she talking about? She's wrong, and just discard what she said. But there's a power to words. And this is something that magicians and mentalists use all the time. And I'll show you how we use that. And I'll demonstrate, Chase, for you something with a deck of cards. So before I do it, I want you to see that there's nothing in my hands. That's very important. And there's nothing in my sleeves either. So hands are empty, sleeves are rolled up. And I'm going to use a deck of cards for this, which I will give a quick mix to, and you could see that that is a legit shuffle. And in a moment, Chase, I'm going to have you name a number between 5 and 25, or 26. That's half the deck. So 5 and 26. And I'm going to count from the top to that position. So Chase, go ahead, a number between 5 and 26.
9.
9. Do you want to change it, or you want to stick to 9?
I'll change it.
To what?
Let's do 14.
14. Do you want to change it, or do you want to stick to 14?
Let's keep it.
Okay, you're keeping 14.
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to see, I'm going to count from the top to the 14th position. So that's 1, King of Hearts, 2, and I'll do it here so you guys can see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's the 7 of spades. 7 of spades. Watch the 7 of spades carefully. I'm going to take it out of the deck, and you could hear it in the mic. Watch.
What in the world?
And you could see that despite the fact that you could have named any number, despite the fact that I showed you my hands and sleeves completely empty, that corner of the card that you randomly chose is now permanently, and that's exactly the same, not more or less, that's exactly the same corner of your card, now permanently part of me. So here's the thing. The reason
you're not gonna tell people how you do this? What a
Now, the reason I wanted to demonstrate that specific trick is because it's one I've been doing for a very, very long time. And I've not only seen people's reactions to it, but I've seen them bring it up in the future and tell people what happened or what I did. And there's a psychological principle that I use in that piece and in a lot of other pieces as well that we really depend on. And it basically takes a really impossible moment, but it makes it even more impossible in people's memories. And that is at the end, right at the end, as they're reacting. It's like, oh my God, as I reiterate what happened, I say, and remember, I showed you both my hands and sleeves before we started, and you could have picked any number. And what that does is it kind of hijacks the memory of how they remember it, because those things aren't entirely true. I didn't really show you my sleeves before we started. I kind of did it in a very contrived, this way and that way. So, but in their memory, when I say, listen, remember I showed you both my sleeves, those words take that memory and kind of make it even more impossible than it actually was. And when I say you could have picked any number, that's not necessarily true either. I said between 5 and 26, but that kind of finds a way to edit itself out. Because as they remember it and they freak out, and I say that, later they go, oh my God, the guy picked any card, and he showed us his hands. I touched his hands before we started, and it's crazy how the memory doesn't match what happened because of the words that we use to recap right at the end. And it's the same thing here. You could see one thing, but in the way that this woman describes it, the words that she uses, the adjectives that she uses, will affect people's memory of what they saw. And Chase, this reminds me of a very popular study in persuasion, which had to do with car accidents that I know you're very familiar with. Do you want to talk to us about that really quick?
Yeah, I think this was by Elizabeth Loftus. I may be getting that name because we didn't plan on talking about this, but they showed people a video of a car hitting an object. But when they asked them, how fast was the car going when it hit the object? It was like a pretty slow speed. How fast was the car going when it collided with the object? It was a higher speed. How fast was it going when it smashed into the object? And it was a much higher speed, just from the words that were used on the questionnaire. And that really changed. It didn't just change how someone was thinking, it changed memory. That one thing edited human memory. So it's a big deal. And it can, if you think that you're immune to this, I would beg you to reconsider, because it benefits you the most to realize that you're vulnerable, because you're going to look out for some of these things in your life.
Now we're going to go on and look at some details of the investigation and some questions that Chase and I have, to say the least. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content. And as a reminder, for those of you who are on Facebook, we recently launched the Behavioral Arts Facebook page, where I'll be posting shorter videos, we'll have some discussions, and you can even post videos or topics that you think are interesting behaviorally, and we can all discuss. I can use everyone's help to get the ball rolling, so if you're on Facebook, please check it out. I'll leave a link in the description.
Was there any strategy on the part of the Boulder Police Department to try to put pressure on the Ramseys through the public?
I believe there were discussions with the FBI, yes, about how to exert some public pressure on people who were not cooperating, yes.
Y'all were looking to see if there was any pathology in this family.
We did.
And you didn't find any, did you?
I don't think, to answer your question, that there was anything remarkable or outstanding as far as what you're inquiring about.
Child use would be pathology. Illegal drug use would be pathology. Domestic violence would be pathology, right?
Yes.
Didn't find anything about that with respect to this family, did you, sir?
Drug use, child abuse, or spousal abuse, not that I'm aware of.
So for context, that is former detective Stephen Thomas, who was brought in on the case, and it's important to note that his experience prior to this was pretty much exclusively in narcotics. But he was brought into this case, and here we're seeing a deposition where he's answering questions pertaining to what happened in the case.
So we see him answering a lot of questions down at the table. We don't see him presenting many facts, and we hear one gigantic misleading statement here, hugely misleading. And he says yes and no to all these questions. And he says, as far as we were looking into this abuse and blah, 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 not that I'm aware of. He doesn't have the courage to say no, or maybe the integrity. Everything that I'm seeing here looks smug, and the next video just amplifies all of that to where we can see a lot more. So what did you see?
That's actually one of the most kind of conclusive things I've heard you say. You know, usually like, and I could see because you've worked in this field, you know, you've trained law enforcement officers, so I could see that it personally affects you the way, because what I'm seeing is someone who won't admit that there were certain things that they did that were wrong, despite the fact that he knows that. Here's the thing, he's not an unintelligent man, because you could tell in the way that he's answering that he's aware that there were certain things that were done that pushed the investigation a certain way. Behaviorally, a few things that jumped out at me is that in the beginning, he tries to blame share with the FBI. When he's asked if the police department made any efforts to put public pressure on the Ramseys, he kind of brings the FBI into it. Yeah, there were some discussions with the FBI to make it seem like it was out of his hands and it wasn't his decision. Now, to be fair, I don't know if that's correct, if the FBI was the one who had that idea, but at the very least, he's kind of trying to take that blame and spread it across, you know, it wasn't just us. One other thing, when he's asked if there was any pathology that they found, he says, I don't think, to answer your question. So we have this little to answer your question. These are little tactics we use to buy time. Things we throw into the beginning of a sentence to just give us an extra second to think about how we're going to word this. And then he says, I don't think, to answer your question, that there was anything remarkable or outstanding. And that's still a little bit, you know, deceptive, I would say, because he knows that there was nothing. The answer to that question is, no, we didn't find anything. But to try to drag it out that way and say there wasn't anything outstanding or remarkable suggests that, well, there might have been something. It just wasn't outstanding or remarkable, and he knows that to not be true. So yeah, I agree with you, Chase. I think that this answer is very calculated and misleading, and it's not from a lack of knowledge, it's from a lack of accountability. I want to throw in a quick note here. It seems like a lot of the clips that we're looking at in this video are in favor of the Ramseys. And it must be said that by the time episode 2 rolled around in this Netflix series, it became quite clear that the documentary itself is in favor of the Ramseys. So because this is an analysis of not the case overall, but this series, a lot of these clips seem to be headed that way. With that said, I think it's important that when we watch documentaries, we try to figure out if it's trying to lean one way or the other. And it's fine if it is, because you go, okay, well, I'm going to consider all these things, and these are important things, but I'm also going to be mindful that they're trying to go down a certain path. But we are both trying to keep an open mind and consider all sides when it comes to the analysis overall.
One of the doctors we consulted cited toileting issues as a textbook example of causing a parental rage. So in my hypothesis, there was some sort of explosive encounter in the child's bathroom. I believe JonBenet was slammed against a hard surface, such as the edge of a tub, inflicting a mortal head wound.
The agreement was unanimous that she was alive at the time that vaginal trauma was inflicted. True?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And you still believe that the garrote would have been placed there by Patsy Ramsey to stage the crime? Is that what your testimony is?
If that's what you're telling me, I won't dispute that's what happened.
Well, do you believe that's what happened?
No, I've offered a hypothesis that I believed was consistent with the evidence as I knew it, that possibly what happened.
Were they wet?
When?
That morning.
No.
Did you ask? Did you ask any of the officers there, hey, by the way, were the sheets on JonBenet's bed wet? Did you ask that question to anybody?
I did not.
Chase, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this one, because there are a lot of things in this that I know you teach, and I know you've got a lot on this. There's just one thing I want to talk about that for me as I was watching this really jumped out at me. And it's when he's asked, were they wet? Were the bed sheets wet? Because his theory was that, you know, there was that type of incident that happened at night where she wet the bed. And what is the answer? He goes, when? And that's an interesting answer, because that suggests that there was a point at which they were wet. So the answer to that question is no. Were they wet? No, there was never a point at which they were wet. But he goes, when? Almost suggesting that, well, maybe there was. And then he's asked again, he goes, no, they weren't wet at that time, but they were never wet. So again, we're getting these really thought out and misleading answers. But Chase, take it away.
Yeah, bedwetting is a somewhat common issue for parents to get upset with, but the percentages of children who perish as a result is minuscule, even based on the FBI data. And I looked this morning. So the exchange here is so evasive and deceptive. He's asked a question and responds with, if that's what you're telling me, I won't dispute it. But his behavior all throughout this was a mix of condescension, smugness, attention seeking. He's written a book about this. No doubt he's made some money from it. He even keeps his head down during this in almost a childish way. And I think this is due to maybe his overconfidence. I think he thinks that it might display some element of innocence and a lack of malice. I think that's what he believes that's going to happen here. And with the wet sheets, he's either deliberately deceptive or ignorant to the point of not understanding why someone would ask if the sheets are wet. So his question of when, I think, is ridiculous. He knows when. And if he doesn't, there's a deliberate deception and misdirection going on. In all of his interviews, his behavior has every hallmark of someone with an agenda and not an opinion. It's an agenda. It's not an opinion, in my opinion. And I get that they might have been involved or that things might have happened, but his theory is rooted in nearly nothing based on evidence, and his maturity, his character, and demeanor suggest agenda, narrative, and attention, not investigation or service.
There are two things in what you said that I just kind of want to add a little bit to. One is the demeanor of a child, and I had that in my notes as well, to where it kind of looks like it's very akin to when a kid's in trouble and the parents or the teachers are like disciplining the kid, and you kind of see this little like they know what they did and they know that it was wrong. It looks a lot like that. You don't even need to know anything about body language to see that it looks exactly like that. But another thing that you brought up, and I think is really, really important, and something that I try to constantly be mindful of, especially in analysis, is just because we agree with someone's opinion or someone's conclusions doesn't mean we have to agree with their process or the things that they say and the things that they believe. For example, you can very well watch this case, look at this case and go, look, based on what I'm seeing here, I feel like the parents were involved. And there's a reason this is a cold case. There are a lot of bizarre things happening, whether you are suspecting that the parents were involved or weren't involved. We have to concede to that. So it's fine. There are reasons to look at this and go, there's something about the parents. So you can look at what this guy thinks, that the parents were involved, and agree with that conclusion, but say, yeah, but the way he's going about this, the way he's trying to push certain things that aren't evidence as evidence, the way he's being evasive, the way he's trying to manipulate certain questions, I'm not okay with that.
I have 5 children. They all wet their beds, I'm sure, when they were little. That's no big deal. Patsy had just recovered from stage 4 ovarian cancer. She was grateful to be alive. Do you think that her child wetting her bed would be a big deal? No. She was happy to be alive and to have some more time with her children. So it was just nonsense. It didn't pass the sanity test.
At the heart of all the media coverage, overwhelmingly, is a very basic argument that JonBenet was a sexually abused child. First, what is your general reaction to that large allegation?
Well, it's disgusting to even have to respond to that. It's absolutely false.
There are definitely a lot of things that I look at and I go, I don't know, something doesn't make sense. There are things about the narrative, especially with that ransom letter, that ridiculous ransom letter. There are things about the way he tells the story of going down and finding the body that I have a lot of questions about. But there's one thing that has jumped out at me, and it's the fact that almost from day one, there seems to be a good synergy between the two. They're in on this together. And even after Patsy's gone, and it's been a while that she's not around, he still runs to her defense. And we're seeing that here. When he says, do you think that she would have been upset over her child wetting the bed? He looks directly at the camera. And this is off baseline, because most of the time he's talking to whoever's behind the camera like this. And right at that second, we see a quick flash. Do you think? And looks right at the camera. And he's speaking right to all the people who suspect them or who suspect her specifically. Like, do you really think that this woman would have been upset over something like that? So even now, all these years later, he's running to her defense. But if we go back and look at that other clip all the way back then, there's still this synchronicity, this synergy, this togetherness that was always there, which to me leads me to a partial conclusion about what happened here, but I'll save that for the end of the video when I'm doing my conclusion. Chase, take it away with these clips.
Yeah, so one thing that you're going to see in this clip is when they're asking about the assault, you're going to see restraint and anger. You're going to see John's lips tighten up, and it's very subtle. So maybe, Spidey, you can zoom in on it or something. I don't know. But you'll see those little lips go. You'll see this tightening, and this is anger that he is not only holding back, but he is displaying it in a way that it's not performative. So I always measure, is the behavior that I'm seeing something that is a performative thing that's made to make me think or feel a certain way? This one definitely was not. One thing you see between him and Patsy is there's never what we call a confirmation glance. They don't look at each other after these stories. And I've never seen anything remotely resembling stress and deception from them, with one exception, just one. And that's all about the letter. The big spikes I see in every stress with both of them, every time they get asked about this handwritten letter, a ransom note, the most stress you see out of them is about that one letter.
I'm also going to throw this in. I know a lot of my viewers are sick of hearing me say this, and to an extent I'm sick of saying it, but it's just so common out there that I'm actively trying to fight this myth that we see both of them doing this while they're answering that question. And there's so many people out there that the moment they see this, when someone's talking, they go, deceptive, that's deceptive. When somebody does this and they're talking, that's absolutely not true. It can be. If you have this kind of someone saying something afterwards, you have this kind of little bit of a no like this, it can be, but all this shows is some type of inner conflict. You might do this to signal something that you had a hard time believing. Like, I come back from vacation, you go, how was that? I go, it was unbelievable. We had such a great time. Like, I never thought I would have that much of a good time. Or you might do it with disapproval. You know, somebody tells you something that's somebody else, and you kind of do this like, I can't believe they would do something like that. So yes, it can mean that, but always remember, when we see these behaviors, we have to ask ourselves why they're happening. So to be clear, can it be deceptive here? It certainly can, but is it 100% that? No, absolutely not. See? Absolutely not. Doesn't mean I'm being deceptive. I'm just saying not. No.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Oh, that's hard to do. Absolutely not.
Detective Steve Thomas ran a list of reasons why the Ramseys were under suspicion, including the behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey was not in keeping with a kidnapping, but more like the way people would respond after a death.
Chase, you have a lot of experience with high-stakes investigations and situations. And there was, in that statement, something that caught my eye, where it said that the behaviors were more akin to someone dealing with death rather than a kidnapping. And in all my studies and all my personal experience, there's stress and there's no stress. I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically behaviors that, okay, these stressful behaviors only happen with kidnappings and these stressful behaviors only happen with death. Is there a difference? Is there a different type of stress? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if we're dealing with somebody who genuinely believes there's someone missing and they need to get them back, your motivation is going to be, what are they motivated to do right now? So they're going to be higher energy, desperation, motivation. They're going to be in the middle. If we just look at the grief cycle, the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, they're going to be in the middle. They're going to be denial, anger, bargaining. Please help us. We'll do anything. We'll pay any amount. They're going to be high energy. And with someone who is certain about a death, they will have already completed that. They will be at the acceptance phase. You're going to witness a lot more apathy and lower energy levels. And no matter what we're really looking at here, what we're seeing is a quote from someone. We were not there. We don't know what he saw. He didn't enumerate all of those elements that he was looking at. The detective before him said she could tell he was a murderer because of the way his eyes looked. And so we don't know what he saw, but that's what I would interpret from that statement.
Yeah, I agree. It's possible that they were behaving more, the way someone reacts to death rather than kidnapping. We weren't there. So although we've seen answers from him that are calculated, on this one, we don't know. We don't know if they were behaving that way or that way. So, yeah, no comment.
We left took the kids and went to some friend's house for dinner Christmas night. I don't remember when we left, maybe six-ish, got home by 9:30 probably. I believe the killer came into our home while we were gone, waited until we were asleep. I think that's for sure.
We had cases in Boulder where suspects went into residents in the middle of the night both before and after the Ramsey case, and either attempted assault or completed sex.
Before I throw it over to you, Chase, I just want to really quickly address what the gentleman was talking about in that second part of that clip, to saying that there were other cases like this in the area around that time. In fact, there's an article that People Magazine wrote, I'll leave a link in the description for those of you who are interested, that lists all the people that could have done something like this for different reasons that over the years people have suspected. And we're going to talk a lot more about these in episode 3 when we do that analysis. I don't know if that's next week or the week after, but when we cover that, we'll talk about it more. But it's important to note, there's a big narrative out there, a lot of certainty around people saying it was for sure the parents, it for sure wasn't the parents. And I think it's worth considering that there are a lot of different people who, for a lot of different reasons, are suspected of having done this, including the parents. So that's just a little food for thought there. Chase, what do you have with the behaviors?
These look like honest statements, but then you see him do a lip lick. Then you see him do a shoulder shrug. So he must be lying, because those are behaviors that you see on LinkedIn articles and Facebook articles, right? Well, until you take in context and baseline. So is it a change to someone's baseline? Lip licking is in his baseline, and he shrugged his shoulder. And what do we always say about shrugging shoulders? It indicates an uncertainty about what someone's saying. And he's literally verbally communicating an uncertainty about time there. So what we're really looking for when we talk about clusters is change. Change is always first. And this comes from something called the C5 model, and it's in the Standards for Behavior Analysis. And I'll give you the 5 C's right now. This is change is number 1. Then we look for context. If someone's crossing their arms, is it freezing cold in the room? Then we have clusters. Are the behaviors occurring in a little pile where I'm seeing multiple data points instead of one tiny thing that's happening? Then we have culture. Is there something about the culture that's influencing the behavior that I'm witnessing here? And at the very bottom of that list is the checklist. This would be something like the behavioral table of elements, or the checklist of things that are known deception indicators, which there aren't any, but when people make those lists, that would be what a checklist is. And that C5 model is a foundation of the system that I teach called NCI, or Neurocognitive Intelligence. And we just finished building our first textbook for the entire NCI system.
Yes, sir. Thank you for walking us through that. And it's a great book, the Behavior Ops Manual. I've got the OG version with the spirals, this one. Very practical, because I wear it like this when I go places, that way I could just reference, when something happens and I need to reference, it's just really handy, no pun intended. But there's a paperback that you have on Amazon now. I'll leave a link in the description for those of you who are interested in that. It's all of Chase's work, fascinating stuff. Oh, there it is, yeah, beautiful. But it's got all your work on persuasion, on behavioral analysis, on profiling. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And because it's the holidays, I'm giving one away right now. So right at the conclusion of this video, we're going to do a little contest, a little giveaway, and one of you is going to win a copy of the book. And for the rest of you who are interested, I'll leave a link in the description where you guys can go check out that to learn all of Chase's work. And yeah, Chase, concerning this analysis, I think it's so important to keep that C5 model in mind. It's very well explained in the book. And these are, I think, where when you look at urban myths on deception detection, when you look at people, oh my God, this person's lying because, this was lying because, it's usually because they fail to keep in mind one of these steps, right? So like you said, we see this no gesture and we go, oh my God, the person's being deceptive, when it could just be someone having a hard time accepting something, or some kind of inner debate, or even some kind of emphasis. Or when we neglect clusters, like you said, and we see one thing and we jump on it, whereas all these behaviors can mean something else. So the more you see at the same time, the more it raises the confidence.
There are thousands of videos that exist out there where people are lying their ass off, and there's not some giant pile of clusters. They're not always there. And I think a lot of experts are afraid to say that. I think a lot of experts are afraid to say, sometimes I won't see those clusters because they're just not there.
But yeah, it's a great point. Even at our best, we're aware that what we do is just clues, it's indications. It's not 100%. It'll never be 100%. There's a lot of research out there that shows that there are certain things that happen, and knowing those things can increase your odds a little bit to become better at it, but no one in the history of the world got to 100%. No one.
Yeah, it's like predicting a hurricane path. There's like 15 different models that point in different directions, and they're all based off of the same data.
Chase, once again, man, I really want to thank you for joining us and bringing so much insight and context, one of the 5 C's, to this analysis. It's always a pleasure, man. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, man. I'm sorry I glitched throughout the entire thing, but hopefully you got them all edited out. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, before we go to the contest where one of you is going to win a copy of Chase's book, The Behavior Ops Manual, let's do a quick conclusion of this episode. It was very much focused on throwing doubt at the investigation and the way things went down. And although there are definitely things about it that were wrong, again, it's important to keep in mind that this documentary really wants us to see that side. So it's important to consider both sides. Just because this documentary is making a compelling case for a lot of the things that were wrong with the investigation doesn't mean it completely absolves the Ramseys and we go, oh yeah, okay, well clearly the whole thing was messed up. It's important to consider this and their behaviors as well, and some of the things on the story that for you don't add up. There's a reason that this is a cold case, and up until today, not just in the public eye, but even within professionals, there's a lot of disagreement on whether it was an inside job or the intruder theory. And I think that distinction simply comes down to where we each individually put our priorities and our importance. Some people look at them talk about the ransom letter and some of the details of that day and go, no, there's something about that not adding up to me. I don't feel like that makes sense. So for me, that's important. I think it was an inside job. And then others might look at it and say, yeah, but who knows how people would act in a situation like that? I've never been in a situation like that. So I'll forgive those things, but the DNA doesn't match and the way it was done doesn't match an accident. It was rather brutal. So some people focus on those things and steer in a different direction. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a hunch in either direction. I just have a bit of an issue with certainty, being certain that this is exactly what it was or this is exactly what it was. Look, nobody knows exactly what it was except for the person out there who did this. Behaviorally, however, there is one thing that I'm personally leaning towards a little, and it's the belief that they either both were involved or neither was involved. I personally don't think that one was involved and that the other one has no clue what's going on. And the reason for that is that we know the worst side of our spouses. And if something like this happened to where either one of them suspected the other, we would see this desynchronization, a lack of synergy. However, as we discussed earlier, it seems like from day one, there's been this synergy. I've seen a lot of cases where one was involved, the other one wasn't, and it was lacking this symmetry between the two. Maybe because one had guilty knowledge, so that put a damper. Maybe the other one was a little, suspecting something or questioning something, so that put a little damper. This is like they were a team from day one. And even until today, he defends her even after she's been gone for a while. So I think it's either both or neither, but I don't think it's one without the other. But more on this in the analysis of the 3rd episode, which is coming up. I don't know if it's gonna be next week or the week after because I'm really busy with the holiday season with corporate events and appearances at those events. So it's got me pretty booked up. Don't know if I'll be able to do it next week, but if not, I'll see you the week after that. But right now, let's get to a giveaway of Chase's book. So one of you is going to receive Chase's book, The Behavior Ops Manual, full of his life's work and some amazing stuff on persuasion, profiling, and behavioral analysis. For the contest, we'll keep it real simple. In the comments below, leave me a comment telling me what country you're from. That'll be your way to let me know that you're interested in entering the contest. And let me know, in all the time that you've been interested in behavioral analysis or body language or profiling, what is something that you've learned that was valuable to your life, whether it was professionally or in your everyday life? I'd love to know how you're applying this in your life. So let me know in a comment. You can also let me know what you thought of this specific analysis in a separate comment or in the same comment, doesn't matter. As long as you put the country that you're watching from, that'll allow me to know that you're interested in entering the contest. And obviously don't put more than that, address, city, don't need any of that. Country is more than enough. I will randomly draw a name to determine the winner and I will reply directly to your comment to let you know that you've won a copy of the book. I will also announce the winner on the community tab and the Facebook page. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. Let me know how behavioral analysis has helped you. Let me know where you're from and we'll have a winner very soon. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If I don't see you before the holidays, have an awesome and safe holiday season and I'll see you on the next one.